I think I'd like to start with Ms. Elrosun on talent, because I think that's a subject that we haven't focused on too much over the last 2 days, and it is absolutely critical to everybody in this room, and you know, acknowledgeably a big challenge for everybody here, everyone's companies here on stage, and for the industry in the GCC. So, Ms. Elrosun, I'll start by taking a question from the audience. What is your position on Saudiization? I think that probably refers to any targets for Saudiization in the industry, and you know, are those enforced, and do they make sense?
Thank you for the question. That's a very easy question. Saudi Aramco has the highest Saudiization level in Saudi Arabia. It ranges between 84 to 86% of our total workforce, which is 66,000. And we also enforce Saudiization through the supply chain with our partners, our suppliers, vendors, and the same with our subsidiaries and our joint ventures.
Okay. I mean, Saudi Aramco is renowned actually for, as you said, you yourself said it's the employer of choice in Saudi, and for very good reason, and it has a very reputable history of training and development. And as you said, you take on employees at a young age. So I think it stands out quite a lot in the region, actually, as an example. But you refer to a couple of challenges, generally speaking, in the industry, which is still, we have a very big disconnect between the skills that are available and what the industry is actually asking for. So what more can the energy sector generally, and just putting Saudi Aramco aside perhaps, but generally speaking, what can the big national companies here and the international companies operating in the GCC do more of to make the skills match more successful?
Excellent. As I mentioned in my presentation, I think collaboration and partnership with the educational sector is very, very important. Without an input from the industry about what matters, about the priorities, about future projects, about future skill needs, the education sector will be operating in silo. And we will continue to see a widening gap between the output of education and the needs of the market. So participating in advisory boards of universities, providing teacher training, providing, like what we do is, you know, some of our senior professionals, they will take sabbatical from the company and go teach in these universities in subjects that are critical to the company. Provide summer training to students, whether you know, in primary school or in universities. All of these activities will help convey to the educational sector the areas that are critical for the industry, and based on that, the educational sector will be able to revamp and upgrade their content to reflect the needs of these companies.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Hoekstra, if I can go to you with this same theme of talent and how the industry generally can work on sort of getting rid of the sort of stigma that's still out there, that the energy industry is not exciting, it's dirty from a product's point of view, and you know, perhaps boring. Now we know that's wrong, we know that's not accurate, but there's still perhaps in the young new generation that immediate assumption. I mean, do you see that changing, and what can companies like Vopak do to sort of educate young graduates to join?
I do see that. I do see that changing. We at Vopak have a very simple belief that if you want to be successful, the organization needs to reflect the society that you serve. So I think that an organization needs to be therefore diverse in both age brackets, needs to be diverse in competencies, diverse in male and female and nationalities. But what we try to do now, we've seen clearly that if you look at the oil sector and the chemical sector, the oil sector has something to explain. If you look at the millennials now, and if the way that they look at at how energy should move forward, it's most of it non-hydrocarbon. So there's a sentiment there that needs to be bridged. And if you look at chemicals, I think if you I think, particularly in Northwest Europe, we have been, I sit at the board of EPCA, and we have a similar discussion. We're relatively poor at educating the young on what a fantastic sector the chemical industry is, and that we use these products every single day in our daily lives. The common theme there is to explain it better to youth, and also the thing that we say, particularly in the oil and gas sector, if we hire people, say that there is a challenge. There's some, with globalization, technical developments, obviously the sustainability issue there. There's a challenge there, but wouldn't you like to join companies like ourselves and obviously colleagues sitting next to me to actually solve this issue? Because actually, if you peel it down to a basic idea of providing energy, food, and water to world markets, you can appeal to young people to start solving it. So we just try to make it into a challenge instead of a problem.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to stay with you, Mr. Hoekstra, and just jump to Vopak's core business of logistics. And there's been a lot of talk in the last 2 days about how the GCC industry here needs to integrate more, needs to find synergies for efficiency and to avoid overlap, etc. So there's been talk about that integration, and it's happening step by step. And how does that impact how the logistics world thinks, and how will it impact your business if indeed we see a lot more integration happening amongst the producers here?
Yeah, what I find interesting is if you look at the world of logistics, the world we're living in, we see that there are 3 distinctive regions on how this issue is seen and let's say discussed. If you look at the European petrochemical sector, as alluded to, integration is required for sheer existence. Right? There's an issue with the feedstock, issue with energy costs. So people look automatically to neighbors to get integration and to find solutions and opportunities. If you look at the modern facilities, particularly if you look at the Asian countries, whether it's Singapore, Malaysia, or Thailand, or China, it was government sort of imposed. They believed that there was a lot of gain from setting it up right from the start, because waterfront is scarce, land is scarce. So already there was a push from government to support companies like ourselves to at least get a voice in the industry. I think that has been slightly different, particularly in North America, where there's a lot of land and a lot of sort of liberal approach. There's less integration there. And also here in the Middle East, there was no real requirement to integrate at early stages. I think what you see now is that with the opportunities that we see, is that there's much more talk. It's easier to find a commonality. So what I would expect, what you see in North America and the Middle East, is that companies will place it much further ahead of their agenda, and makes it easier for us to actually sit together with them and actually demonstrate all the benefits that you can actually get by creating opportunities.
And do you think there are obvious areas here where things can be managed logistically more efficiently in the GCC?
Well,
you have 3 partnerships in the region.
You have to build partnerships, and you have to create clusters, because the amount of opportunities that you create in sharing feedstock, sharing energies, sharing wastewater, sharing anything that you can think, is ultimately benefiting the end consumer and your costs. So it's a very wide spectrum that you can debate.
Okay, and is Vopak looking at any new partnerships here in the region?
Yes, we are. We are always, well, obviously there are a few very, very large sites. We're very pleased that we are in Jubail and in Fujairah. So there are a few large sites which are coming up, so we are pursuing that again with the same passion and intensity to explain what is possible. And so far from the learnings we've taken in the 40, 50 years that we're active, once it's done, and once it's done properly, there are only winners for the next 40, 50 years. So that's really the message that I'd like to give.
Are there any particular products that you would say need your input more at this stage? I mean,
well, at this stage, we're particularly active in liquids. So we haven't been handling solids, and there's some very good companies that can do that. So anything liquid. So most of the time, the integration between the refinery, the cracker, and all the liquids that come out. So the first sort of first stream volumes we're particularly keen in. But also, we've invested quite a bit in feedstock, lighter feedstock. So we've invested in Singapore, in China, in Europe, for clients, in giving them flexibility to not only use naphtha, but for instance, crack propane as well. So these are typical things that we are discussing today.
Yeah, and of course, feedstock, I think, has been the word, the one buzzword, the last 2 days,
Yes.
in all conversations, and critically. The good thing is it's being recognised as something that's being dealt with and strategized for. Mr. Nafimovsky, I'd like to go to you and ask you about. Obviously, we've seen the oil price, drop in the last 2.5 years. That's affected budgets of all companies across the board, and clearly is affecting investment decisions. How is it affecting? I mean, you referenced obviously a lot of detail in your presentation, but if companies themselves can't continue to invest in their own activities in a significant way because of these budgets, what other sources of funding are out there that could come in and make sure that R&D is kept up, that maintenance is kept up, that these things don't fall on the back burner?
I mean, the world is, interestingly, the world is full of money. There's a lot of money.
That's good to know.
Everybody is looking for some investment opportunities and trying to invest in different, R&D projects, but also some other investments. I think maintenance and other projects is something that the companies should do, and sometimes they decide against that for different reasons. But I would say that pockets of funding is available on all different levels. There is, we see new investors coming into the market all the time. The different pockets of funds that are looking at long-term, short-term, as well as no interest, and that can provide quite a substantial kind of funding for projects. I think that is not an issue. It's a question about how do you find the right projects and you have the right forecasts, or at least a bottom-up story that makes it interesting for an investor.
Okay, I'd like to just address there's a lot of restructuring obviously going on amongst the national oil companies here in the region. They've all announced, realignment and restructuring moves this year for efficiencies and for new investments. Saudi Aramco is planning a partial privatization drive, which was obviously very big news this year. It hasn't happened yet, and considering it will happen, Mr. Nakimovsky, do you expect any of those funds that are released from that IPO to go towards the downstream sector, or would you see them going more into sort of economically diversifying
I think
Saudi economy?
No, I think downstream is something that is actually quite profitable, and I think going forward, people now recognize how important it is to be integrated, how important it is to actually further capture the value chain, not to become dependent on just maybe producing certain raw materials, but actually have the technology and access to markets in order to grow the companies further. So I think in chemicals in general, you can't stand still. You have to move forward. You have to invest. You have to really invest to broaden and strengthen your business. So if that doesn't happen, you actually go backwards. So I think there will be certainly investments in downstream.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to our chart here and pick out a couple of last questions that we might have time for. Let's see, another one from Mr. Nakimovsky. How do you see the impact of the recent rise in protectionism and hawkish fiscal measures on the chemical market? You've just said there's lots of money out there, but how is protectionism in terms of agreements and trade?
I think that the key, we are already living in low growth environment. And I think protectionism actually will, and we will have to see what form protection. I mean, people are talking about what the US is going to do, whether there will be protectionist or not. But let's see how that will pan out. But clearly any protectionism has a negative impact on growth. Negative impact on global growth has an impact on demand and investment and profitability of companies everywhere. One could potentially win in the short term in certain regional aspect, but generally that would be a bad thing for the world as a whole.
We had a few comments on that in the panel earlier this morning as well from our panelists. Mr. Hoekstra, I have a question here for you from the audience. What avenues of industrial terminal growth in the region do you foresee? And do you offer to acquire any infrastructure against realized savings? So beyond the geographies that you're in at the moment, are there any other obvious ones that
Beyond the Middle East or within the Middle East?
No, within the Middle East, but within the region, which ones do you foresee as ripe for the picking, if you like, low-lying fruit?
The major sites today is where further integration can take place and further economies of scale can be reached. Obviously, in the kingdom, in Jubail, you have a site there, so you exploit it to the best. So I would, instead of again spreading the investments across the region or across the kingdom, I think take one site and really get everything out of that. I think obviously we've seen, let's say on the other side of the Gulf, currently in Persia, there are a few opportunities there to also integrate further and to get the synergies out. And here in the UAE, there are not that many sites because it's still again spread over different locations. So I think, if I have to say, I think probably the Ras Lavan is well integrated. In Persia, you have a few opportunities, and in the kingdom, those are the three major sites that I would see for the Middle East. And the same thing you see in Europe and in Asia and in North America. There are only a few that you can entertain. You should really limit it to a few and get the best out of it.
Okay, thank you very much.